Welcome to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
And I'm your other co-host, Josh, and I've seen Kid Cudi's penis 2 times now.
Okay.
I forgot about that scene in this movie. So I've seen this movie twice, and I forgot about his penis both times. But it's fresh in my memory now, and we're kicking off whatever you want to call this, the 2 series back-to-back. We're covering the Pearl X Ty West trilogy, and then we're jumping into Aliens. But we're joined by our good friend, Kelly-Reynolds. She is the host of the boobies-n-noobies-podcast, which I'm not sure if it's still alive or not. And she's also an author.
Yeah, no, and you know what? I'm not sure if the podcast is still alive either. It'll probably come back around Christmas, but until then, I'm kind of focusing on writing. Oh, and I will never forget about Kid Cudi's penis. I just want to put that out there, just in case he's listening.
I must have blocked it out or something.
That's all right. I'll find a picture and I'll send it to you.
You will. I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, but remember that time I sent you a dick pic and then you opened it up and it was Nightwing. So remember, it still counts as a dick pic. But speaking of dick pics, Kelly is the author behind one of the new book called Hit It and Quit It. Tell us a little bit about this book.
First of all, I love that the segue to talking about my romance novel was speaking of dick pics, but honestly fair because I see what you did there. And there's plenty of dick in my book as well. Yes, my latest release is called Hit It and Quit It. I've kind of launched a new baseball romance series that's set in the Pacific Northwest where I live. I love baseball. I love romance. I love people falling in love, but making it a little bit messy. So that's kind of what I aim for in my romance novels is funny, messy, cute love.
So you started out with 2 holiday novellas, and I'm kind of curious what made you kind of pursue and shift into something that is springtime, but also like sports, because I personally wouldn't associate you with sports, but
first of all, I am a sports fan. It's not my entire personality, but I do love both baseball, football, and basketball are kind of like my go-to sports. I'm born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have a former football coach of a father. So I was kind of raised on sports, whether I wanted to like it or not. But yeah, no, baseball though is kind of like when I thought about what I wanted to write next, I knew that I wanted to write something set in Oregon where I live, but I also wanted to do, I don't know, something that like had some longevity. So what has a lot of people that could all get their own books other than a team? So I went with baseball because that's kind of, we don't have a professional football team in Portland, which is really sad. We don't have a professional baseball team, but we do have a local team that's, I guess, affiliated with some pro team, but we're the Hillsboro Hops. Our mascot is Barley, as in barley into beer, hops. Yeah. So this is what I love about, especially like minor league and the like farm team baseball is they have the best team names. It's always a food, or there's one called the Dairy Daddies. There's I have like t-shirts and swag from these teams that I've never seen play in my life, but I just think they're the funniest thing ever. And so I came up with something that I thought is pretty well representative of Portland, since the book takes place outside of Portland, and that's coffee. And so my team is called the Rose City Roasters. So naturally I've got barista branded all kinds of crap. And that's half the fun. Honestly, like I probably put a lot more time into like coming up with like the silly stuff that I want to put on stickers and send to people as I do actually writing the damn book.
That's fair. And then look at this. Our friendship still blossoms. It still grows.
I know. And we've talked about so much too.
I know. One of the things that I appreciate about your books is that I know that when our friendship kind of started, there was kind of like this. I was in the norm with most people, kind of thinking romance is like, oh, it's smut. It's basically literary porn. And you've since changed my ways and changed my mind on that. As Mark sits over there quietly judging me.
Well, Mark, that
I'm
just
always
means
judging.
you'll have to do an episode of Boobies and Newbies. Like, we have to bring you into the fold. But no, and that was the whole, I know I'm not doing as much of the podcast now, but that was the whole idea behind starting the podcast. Was I had years of friends and coworkers and even like teachers kind of making fun of the fact that I love to read romance novels, but 9 out of 10 times they had never read one themselves. And so I wanted to start a podcast where I asked people to read what may be their first romance novel, to even just consider it as a genre. And then we talk about it. And I have to say, the amount of people who have done it and gone on to read more romance or asked for recommendations or, been at least more receptive to the idea of checking out a romance novel, it's been the majority of the people who have been on the podcast. And I have over 200 episodes at this point.
Yeah. So I will say, because I was like segueing into another question, I will say that like my Goodreads last year was like 90% horror, and then like that 10% was romance.
Yes.
So you got me. You got me.
A win is a win.
I've picked up other things that I normally wouldn't have picked up in the last few years because of my friendship with you. So
Did you ever go back and read any like Lovecraft or anything after our Lovecraft episodes we've done?
I did.
Oh, sweet.
Nice.
What'd you think?
Lovecraft's a weird dude.
Yes.
He is. He had a weird tendency to do something that a lot of other authors couldn't quite pull off, where he would change perspective in the middle of talking about something from like the observer to first person. In like the middle of a conversation, in like the middle of a chapter or the middle of a paragraph, he would change perception.
Point of view.
Perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. From being like the viewer to the actual person involved.
That's interesting. Like, and I give major props to anybody who kind of like breaks from the convention. And I mean, I feel the same way about filmmakers, about artists. Like I just appreciate people doing something new and different. And that actually is kind of one of the main reasons why I wanted to start writing myself, was that I wanted to write the stories and the characters that I wasn't finding, that I wanted to see, because I think that's kind of why a lot of people come to romance, is they want to see a story representative of them.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to like jump into is like, a lot of the romance that I've picked up is typically, at least the ones that we've read together, not the ones I've ventured off, and because of recommendations of my wife. But one of the commonalities is that you kind of find this more classical, traditional standard of beauty, which is very petite women, and they're kind of together with the traditional quote unquote Prince Charming version of, and you really kind of break down a lot of those stereotypes where a lot of the women that you write about are very much plus size or, BBWs. And how important is that to kind of spark representation, and how challenging is it to go against the norm?
Yeah, I love to write a big baddie, man, women, whoever. But I do think that we are seeing a lot more readers pushing for that now. They want it. They want to read it. They want to see people who look like them, and we don't all look that way. I would say a minority of people are these, 5'4" tiny petite girlies. And so I love that people are asking for more representation, whether we're talking about body diversity or ethnicity, whatever it might be. I think there's still a lot of ways to go in terms of like finding equity amongst that diversity,
Sure.
but progress has been made. I think progress will continue to be made. There will always be, I think, some pushback from people who sort of have their idea of what the norm, quote unquote, is. But I think we see that in everything. And so long as you continue to write it and continue to talk about it and continue to point out some of the problems with it, because I actually love doing that as well. I love having discussions with authors and readers and bloggers about the issues within the romance novel industry, sure, because there are plenty. And a lot of them do tie back to representation. So I think as long as we continue to acknowledge those things and push to actively change them, we will, continue to see stories representing a little bit of everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
That's
I think
the goal.
that's spoken real well. So what were some of the challenges in, bringing into, obviously creating the world now of sports and bringing that element into the romance aspect to kind of, bring in the puns and bring in the tropes,
the puns, I'm a sucker for the puns, hence the titles of my books. But I would say, even though I'm a sports fan, I've had to do like a lot of baseball research. And I think it's more of kind of finding a balance between what's the right amount of baseball to put into this, but it's not a baseball book. Like it's not about baseball. I try to tell people who are hesitant about reading sports romance, or at least reading my book, I tell them it's not really a baseball romance. It's a romance that has baseball happening in it. And I've gotten the compliment that they don't enjoy sports romance, but they liked my book, which is good enough for me. So, I think one of my biggest challenges with writing anything is sort of keeping track of timelines and character names. Because I have a bad habit of writing a ton of characters, but it's just because I don't want to get rid of any of them, and I want them all to be friends and be happy and love each other and also do naughty things.
I don't know why, but just that last couple of sentences just reminded me of that scene from Mean Girls, where they're all doing the apology thing, and the girl from the other school is like, I wish we could just have, bake a cake of rainbows and eat it.
She doesn't even go here. No, that's so true. I do subscribe to that. And actually, I feel like a lot of my stories that I write are very much of the Schitt's Creek, Ted Lasso variety, where I write in an idealistic world where there aren't a lot of discussions about the tragically awful things that exist in our world. I do acknowledge some things, but because I do want them to still feel very realistic, like that this could be me or you or our friends falling in love, but I don't make it about that. I make it about the characters and whatever's going on with them. So yeah, I do like to read a lot of books like that too, where they're happy. And I think that's why a lot of people turn to romance novels. Not to say that there aren't dark romance, horror romance. There's all kinds. That's why I love this genre. There's a little something for everybody. But you always know that the one rule we apply to romance novels is that it ends in a happily ever after. That's it. That's the only qualifier for it to be considered a romance novel. And so knowing that going in, some people might think of that as, it's too predictable. I find comfort in that. I like to know that no matter what awful shit these people are going to deal with throughout the book, they're going to end up together. And there's some comfort in that.
And speaking of another genre that has something for everyone, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Welcome back to Abyss Gazing, where X gonna give it to you because we're talking about Ty West's X. And I am really curious to hear how this conversation is gonna go. But it's kicking off our X Ty West trilogy, whatever you want to call it. Maybe we'll call it the Triple X trilogy. I don't know what he's decided to call it.
Nice.
We haven't gotten that far in discussions yet.
No, we haven't. So Mark.
Yes.
What do you think about this movie?
All right.
I was expecting something a little bit more darker than the side.
What do you think I was going to say? It sucked.
This movie's terrible.
No, I told you it's. I mean, it's not my favorite. I know a lot of people liked it. It's not my favorite, but I don't hate it either. It's one of those, like, I may watch it if I don't feel like looking for something new. It's, I don't know. It's just, it's okay to me. It's not great. It's not horrible. It's got some fun kills in it.
I will begrudgingly agree.
I just met Mark, and I feel like that's probably like high praise coming from him. Like that's like a compliment. Like, hey, it was okay.
It's not one of my favorites. It's just, it's decent. I didn't think it was great. It was decent, but
yeah,
I have a tendency with a lot of the ones that get a lot of hype behind them, that everybody's like, "Oh, this is great." It's like I watch it and I'm like, "Why?" But in this case, it was decent. It had the way they did the story with Pearl and her husband and everything, and tied that all in, knowing that like 6 months after it was released, they released Pearl. It was an interesting story. I just didn't think it was as great as people were making it out to be.
And you don't have to wait 6 months to hear us talk about Pearl. Hit that subscribe button because we're talking about it next week with Harley Oliver, a Canadian rock musician. Yeah, what's up? We go international sometimes.
On occasion.
On occasion. I kind of agree. I think so. I've just in the last like week and a half, I've just dove in headfirst into pretty much almost all of Ty West's films.
Is Men worth watching at all?
Men's not Ty West, but
I thought it was.
No.
Okay.
So-
I'm an idiot. Never mind.
I think in the grand scheme of both this trilogy, and I know Maxine's not out yet, but in the grand scheme of the trilogy, Anti-West, I don't think that this is his best offering, and it's definitely between this and Pearl, it's definitely the weaker of the two, but it still has a strong foundation.
Now, see, I would disagree. I would think Pearl is the weaker of the two.
But you haven't seen Pearl.
I have seen Pearl.
Oh, I thought you said last week you hadn't seen Pearl. I mean,
No,
okay,
that was Billy, our missing co-host.
that's right. That's right. We're praying for a speedy recovery for you, Billy.
Billy.
I don't know, Kelly. Where do you land on this movie?
So I really enjoy both X and Pearl for different reasons. And I won't go too much into Pearl because I know you guys are going to cover that. I will say stylistically, I love Pearl for just the style and aesthetic alone. This one, I think I like for two reasons. And one, Mark kind of touched on it. I'm also somebody who, when something's very hyped up, I like kind of lose interest in even seeing it. Sometimes I don't even see it. I knew nothing about this movie. I had a friend come to visit me and tell me about these movies, showed me the trailer, and I had never heard anything about them. And we watched both of them, both X and Pearl, in that weekend. So I think part of it was that I didn't have a lot going into it. I was going into it very blind. Secondly, I really enjoy this one because I think it touches on a lot of things that I don't expect. And as if you were already listening to me talk about romance novels, I said, I love things that surprise me. I love when people take on a new, point of view, just anything that surprises me, because I think horror and romance actually have a lot of crossover, both in the people who read and watch it, but also in the conventions of the genres, that they are very, I hate using the word predictable, but like there is like a predictability and a lot of tropes that go along with both of them, which I love. I have no issue with that. And I love that this movie subverts a lot of those. And I will say, I also do love a classic like slasher sort of horror. I'm not big on like monsters, entities, paranormal kind of horror. So I just love someone with an axe, like taking people down one by one. So I think all of those things combined really make me appreciate X.
I feel like I kind of occasionally see films through a different lens when I'm thinking about talking points that one of the things are, mental health themes throughout a movie. Mm-hmm. And I think this movie, going off of what you just talked about, is really surprising in some of the aspects that it addresses, especially with the subject of beauty, but also at the same time, this like subject of love,
mm-hmm.
where if you've seen Pearl, you kind of understand a little bit more of like Pearl and Howard's story, and we'll talk about it next week. Oh. But she, like, essentially at the end of the day, like, just wants to be loved and appreciate it. And not that he doesn't do that, but like probably one of the more awkward scenes here, we joked about it in our group chat, is her Pearl and Howard have sex in this movie.
That shocked the hell out of me the first time I saw it, but like in the best way possible. Because like
I feel like Mia Goth was like traumatized severely being stuck under the bed for that scene.
While Mia Goth playing Pearl is above her having
she's got, it's like I have to imagine my grandparents getting it on. It's like, oh God.
That's because we don't see that though. That's the thing, that the two things that like you said, the whole idea of beauty and beauty fading and everything, like, but the whole thing about aging, it's just something we don't talk about in society in general, especially when it comes to women. And so to see an old woman, like, I mean, you can 100% use the word old when describing Pearl, still be very sexually liberated and still have these desires and want to be desired. And it's just so rare. And then to put that in horror is just wild to me, because I think it kind of is this commentary on that it is horror. Like,
Yeah.
Aging is terrifying.
Aging is absolutely terrifying. One of the things that like is my biggest fear getting older is the fear of the possibility of dementia.
Yes.
And there's been to talk about what you're just addressing with, like, beauty and aging, kind of like how we don't kind of see that commonality. I read this article the other day where here's a name that you probably haven't heard in a while, but I'll bring it up because I'm a huge fan of hers. But Pamela Anderson she's early 50s, but she's like kind of past the point where she's like just doesn't give a damn anymore, and she just like goes out completely like natural, and she looks stunning.
Love.
And I'm like, I was just talking with someone at a convention recently, and I was like, I need, like, that's the type of beauty we should be embracing more. It's like it's not like you hit a certain age and you throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
I think you see it more in women than you do men, because you have the phrase, men age like a silver fox kind of thing.
Yep.
And it's not really that way for women.
I mean, I kind of been aging like Buddha and getting rounder.
You and me both.
That's just your metabolism. That has nothing to do with beauty.
I mean,
to some people, it might add beauty. So
I mean, I'm a sexy bitch. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Mark.
own it, Mark. Own it.
But
Mark, keep your shirt on. Keep your shirt on.
But
Yeah.
with X and Pearl too, it's almost like he took notes from Christopher Nolan, because they are both very focused on obsession. Both of them are.
I don't want to get too
Christopher
much
Nolan. Christopher Nolan, a lot of his movies are based on obsession.
To an extent, you're right. But I think this one, I think it's interesting to have the Maxine obsession, where she wants to be a star, right? She wants to be the biggest name in porn.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the flip side of that, you have Pearl that
was basically the same person.
Exactly. She was exactly the same person. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, but for the point of the conversation and context, Pearl wanted to be a star. You had to have that great meme of like, I just want to be a star.
I want to be a star, mama.
And like, I think the juxtaposition of that, I love that scene too, where they're at the dock. It's Pearl and Brittany Murphy's character, and
Brittany Snow.
Brittany Snow.
Yes.
Brittany Snow.
Yes.
Rest in peace, Brittany Murphy.
Yeah, that's true.
Brittany Snow, and Brittany Snow is kind of like trying to do the traditional, like what you expect, like let's get you back inside. You respectfully treating the elderly, and then like there's something that like snaps. But I love what she says to her. You don't understand the value of beauty, or something to the extent of you waste it.
Mm-hmm.
And man, like that's such a deeply profound thing to think about, because I'm like, I've really struggled with body image issues, and like there's been like seasons of my life where I'm like, yeah, just like Mark said, I'm a sexy bitch. And then there are seasons of my life where I'm just like, man, like I don't want to go out today because I feel fugly.
Nothing looks good. I'm going through one of those phases right now where like I hate everything in my closet. Like I'm just like, ugh, none of this looks right on me. So I think it is like a universal thing that so many people experience. Like fat, thin, tall, short. Like I think we all have our own issues with beauty standards, men and women for sure. But yeah, and then you throw age onto that, and it's just like the intersectionality of those two is wild.
I mean, I just adapted baggy t-shirts and comfy pants and realized I knew how to cook like a champ.
Yeah,
and just went for it. So
that's a good way to look at it. I like that perspective.
Mark can cook, and I can attest to that. Mark is a very good cook.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's not just blowing steam behind him. Like, dude knows how to cook and grill and smoke really well.
So a sexy bitch who can also cook. Damn,
yes.
Like that's a hot commodity.
Yes. No, not even shy about that one.
I have to bring it up because you mentioned Brittany Snow. Brittany Snow's character is probably my favorite character in the movie. Like I think this is her best acting role I've ever seen her do because
Go ahead.
Yeah, Brittany, her character, I think I liked her character the best, mainly because for the most part, with the exception of 2 or 3 movies, she always plays like a goody-goody.
Mm-hmm.
With the exception of a couple movies. But this is even farther out there than her worst characters. So I thought that was interesting to see her take a role that just kind of seems to be outside of her wheelhouse.
Yeah. And I think she plays the character that I think could have very easily just been full-on blonde bimbo. Kind of just like completely stereotypical of what you might have expected from Bobby Lynn. I mean, the name alone, right? But I think she gave so much more depth to this character, and like the idea that she loves what she does. She loves doing porn and stripping, but at the same time, she also does it because she wants this picturesque, like picket fence life. So it's this like idea that you don't generally see.
And she really comes across as the smartest one there and the
100%.
most self-aware. She knows who she is. She knows what she's doing. She knows who's going to watch it, and she doesn't care and has 100% faith in herself to do it like it needs to be done.
I want to talk about that from a horror perspective for a second, but I also just want to throw this out there real quick. One of the things that on the Blu-ray that they had a featurette, and Ty West talks about like always like casting against character. And so like what Mark was saying, like every role that you've ever seen her in, like she's always like the traditional like church girl. I think the edgiest role I've ever seen her do was the Pitch Perfect trilogy. That was like the edgiest I've ever seen her do. And then like when she did this movie, it's like, oh, she's going really against character. She's fantastic in this movie.
She's done like horror before. I mean, she did Would You Rather?
I've not seen Would You Rather.
Do what?
I have
not seen it.
It's decent. It's an interesting concept for a movie. It almost feels like it could have been some sort of inspiration for something like Ready or Not to some extent, with the way it plays out, and it revolves around the game Ready or Not. But it almost felt like she was kind of testing the waters of a different genre than what she was used to, where this was just full blown, I'm here for it.
Yeah. But like, I want to go back to what you were talking about before, where you had talked about how like she really kind of goes against what we normally see in these types of movies, right? Where slasher films are traditionally, you're going in the woods, you're going away from everyone else to kind of have privacy so that no one can see you. And this film's a fascinating pushback against a lot of those slasher tropes. Not just from the angle of, oh, this girl is having sex to where people can watch it. She's fully she's doing it with the full knowledge that she understands what the porn industry is and what she's getting into.
Yeah, she has no delusions about what's going on.
Absolutely none. And I think it's fascinating too to have a slasher that is set in a setting where characters are making a porn. That to me is fascinating because it really does deconstruct a lot of those tropes that we're used to. Don't have sex because you're gonna get killed. And yes, a lot of these people do end up getting killed for having sex, but it revolves and it sets the tone, I think, in a really interesting way, and it offers a lot of surprises, as you were talking about earlier, Kelly.
Yeah. And like you said, I feel like we're used to, especially in kind of like the 80s, 70s, 80s, like slasher movies of like the virginal last girl, right? And so
and there's no virginal in this.
And that's what I love is like you have and I feel like usually you see a lot of flaws in characters in horror movies that are usually so blatant. And with this one, what I love is that they all have sex. They all have their flaws, but they're also all like pretty self-aware of like what those are and very open about what they want and where they want to go. And so you put that all out there on the table and you're just kind of thinking as the viewer, well, I don't want any of them to die. I actually like want to root for these people to make it. And it's I don't know. I don't usually feel like that. And the kills come in like a ways into the movie. Like I think that's the other thing is you spend a good amount of time getting to know and establishing each person before we dive into the actual kills.
Yeah. One of the things that just to kind of go over one of the scenes in particular, just to I think kind of backs up your point is how self-aware this movie is the scene where they're all kind of sitting around eating dinner and Jenna-Ortega goes, turns to I can't remember the guy's name, but he's like the producer. He's Maxine's boyfriend in this movie, and she goes, how can you?
He was such a sleazy car
Wayne.
salesman.
He was Wayne. There you go. So Wayne. So Ortega turns to Wayne and basically asks, how can you let her have sex with a man? And he was like, oh, it's just business. At the end of the day, like that's all it is, and we're gonna keep it business casual. And Kid-Cudi, kind of nods and is like, yeah, like I understand.
And the cameraman's the only one that didn't bang none of them. And he probably has the most violent death of the bunch.
He does. It's
great. No, and that is so funny that he's the first one to go.
I really thought the actor that played him, was the same actor that played Eric in the Evil Dead remake. And I was like, does he just sign up for these brutal murder roles? The actor looks a lot like him.
But a different guy.
A different actor, yeah.
Oh, dude, they do look exactly alike.
Yeah, I thought it was. And I'm like, this guy must just sign up to get brutally murdered, kind of like Sean Bean dies and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I would do it. I would so do that. I think that'd be like the funnest. I would love that. But no, I'm with you in that. And actually, that's the other thing. That's one of the discussions I like a lot. I love that scene because there's a lot of talk about like how you can be in a relationship while also being in the porn industry. And I think that that's like a common misconception that still haunts the like sex work community today. Of this, like, except take that of how can you let your girlfriend be in porn and put it into like, how can you let your girlfriend have an OnlyFans? Like, I feel like we see this so often today still, and people don't have this understanding that you can have this as your business, but then also be in a committed, loving relationship.
Well, so here's the interesting thing about that is I think also from that perspective, just to kind of slightly push back, you have to like the context of this is 70s.
Oh yeah.
And they're also in like Alabama,
Texas, yeah.
Texas.
Oh yeah, no,
Texas.
I think you're right.
Maybe it's Alabama.
Yeah, it
One of
really
them.
had a Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of feel to the environment.
But I mean, either way, like you're in the conservative Bible Belt South,
Right.
and whereas I think now, looking at it with 2024 eyes, it seems to be like the conversation is like, oh well, we see people do this all the time because we live in a time now where the concept of polygamy and open relationships are kind of okay. You know, they're it's kind of just a casual extension to where you can run an OnlyFans and, you know, still be like completely fine. Like sometimes even there'll be cameramen for their wives or girlfriends and, you know, be switching off against different partners. Whereas I think the thing to keep in mind for that, something like what you're saying is, in the context of X, is that this takes place in the 70s.
Oh yeah. Well, and then add in the like religious, like sexually repressed undertones as well, because you have the preacher, like the on the television, like throughout
Televangelist.
Yes, throughout the movie,
who happens to be Maxine's dad.
Yeah, what a great! I loved that
what a
reveal.
Great twist.
I thought that was like a great sort of just like tie into the end, but and then you have Jenna-Ortega's character who like is clearly the one that's still sort of like hanging on to a little bit more of like traditional values in that as well. And so, but I mean, you see her kind of, you know, give in to what's going on and want to be a part of it as well. The same way that you have Pearl, you know, want to have everyone admire her and be with her and want to have sex with her and love her. But at the same time, she's calling other women whores. So, I mean, it is like a really interesting layer to add into it. It's just sort of like the sexual repression that was like going on at that time as well.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Which is really weird to consider in the grand scheme of things, where we went through this sexual revolution in the 60s and kind of this awakening of love and sex positivity. And then you go through this repression again in the 70s, which is fascinating to me because, like, you know, revivals and televangelists kind of really started popping off, and it was kind of like the in thing to do, which even as a Christian, I still think that like the subject of sex is something that needs to be addressed more. And so you don't have stories like Maxine where you have this complete opposite rebellion where it's like, oh, I was always told this is what you don't do. I'm going to go do this.
Right. Yeah. No, it is really interesting. Like this, I do think this is one of those movies where I appreciated it more the second time around after having watched Pearl as well. Like I do think when you watch X, I think it's very enjoyable. When you watch Pearl and then watch X again, I think it does add some layers and put in a little more perspective, especially when it comes to Pearl and Howard. Because the other thing that I really love about this so far with these two movies is that I love a villain that you can't help but like empathize with, like, and
That's villains.
Pearl is that villain. Like, Pearl is that person that, yes, this is awful, and like the things she's doing are terrible, but at the same time, you feel bad. Like, you feel bad for her and Howard, and because I think that is something in society as well, that when we do look at just sort of like how we treat older people, like it's not great. And we definitely don't sexualize them, that's for sure.
Older people are typically, in a lot of other cultures, they're kind of brought into the home and taken care of, where in like the US and a lot of European countries, they're kind of just tucked away and hidden.
Yes.
It's a completely different way to treat the elderly. It's like, we don't want the reminder that we're going to be getting old one day, kind of thing. We don't want to see that every day. So they tuck them away in retirement homes or elderly homes and things like that.
And we do something similar when it comes to sex.
Absolutely. Mark, I don't know how you feel about this. This is a subject that I've become very passionate about. So,
old people.
No, sex, and now it's repressed.
Oh, I could talk about that all day.
So I won't say anything. I'm in the midst of developing a project for Victims and Villains that is sex related. That's all I will say. We'll talk after the Kelly. You already know. I don't know why you're giving me those eyes. So
I don't know. I probably forgot, but count me in. Like, whatever it is, I'm on board.
But I think the idea and the ideas that we've talked about thus far is with the fear of aging, with the societal repression of the elderly, and also the I think that scene where it's Howard and Pearl, and Pearl's like trying to like talk Howard into sex. He says, if I would, I could, I love you. And you see throughout the entirety of the film how much he really loves. Like, it's kind of established that essentially, like, she's got some bloodlust that's curdling over, and they rent out the shack and Howard helps her so that she can cure that bloodlust. But at the end of the day, she just wants to be loved and wants to be appreciated and valued and touched and adored. And I think it's more than just, I want to be a star, but I want to be seen. And anytime that you have a person, especially when it comes to the subject of the elderly or even sex, it is this wanting to be seen because it's a form of expression, which in and of itself, any type of forms of expression, it's tied to your mental health.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, it's especially after you watch Pearl and sort of like her upbringing and like what, and obviously we don't know her full story that led to, 80, 90 something year old Pearl here, but she wants to be seen. She wants to be loved. I think being a star is the like most tangible way to her to like achieve that. But the other thing is just like, oh shoot, I'm having like a major brain fart. I forgot where I was going to go with that. But I think Howard would do just about anything for her. Like, and we see that in this movie.
I think there's a heart attack. I mean, at least that's what a way to go.
Yeah. So
a smile on your face.
Lord, if I gotta go, that's how I need to go.
He's not gonna be rolling off the bed. I mean,
yeah. To just kind of echo that, Kelly, like the idea of you don't necessarily need to be famous. I think when you put it into like context today is like everyone's like, I want to go viral so that I'll get likes and stuff like this, I think we're only at the forefront of understanding what social media does to mental health.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it's been fairly well established how bad it is for mental health.
For your mental health, yes, but I'm talking about in terms of like the lasting effects on the brain. And
yeah, I will be very
specifically-
interested to see that in the future.
It's an instant dopamine rush for a ton of people, and without it, they don't get it. And there's high rates of depression based on that. I don't know how much clearer it can be.
It is, but then you have individuals like yourself that doesn't really like social media, and so it's like, okay, well, where do you get your dopamine from?
And I also work in social media, so like it's one of those things. Like I'll talk about this with my parents, because my dad isn't on anything. He barely knows what a computer is, but I tell them all the time, I'm like, it's a really tricky thing, because there's also a lot of great things that have come out of social media. Like,
Sure.
I think especially during the pandemic, this idea that you can have like instant connection with people if you want it, if people are receptive to it, I think is a positive. I think that can also be a negative, though, because I've seen this especially within the author reader space of sort of people developing these like parasocial relationships with celebrity figures, and this idea that I should be able to contact you and you should respond to me immediately because we're Instagram friends or whatever it might be. I'm a fan. I'm buying your product, so you have to like cater to what I want. So there is like the drawbacks. But I think at the end of the day, and really you can apply this to the movie as well, is just like this need. We are social creatures. This need for connection, I think, is like a major driving force with both social media and also with Pearl and Howard. That's the other thing that I think about, especially having watched both X and Pearl, is this woman has spent her life on this farm in this house. Like this, she is very devoid of human interaction and social connection. And I think that plays a major role in the things that she chooses to do.
I mean, I kind of see some appeal in that, but
Mark lives in literally the middle of nowhere. So
I am not I'm on the edge of the middle of nowhere. I'm not in the middle of nowhere.
But even like this, like between the three of us, this is, I think, social interaction to satisfy. I think it's enough to satisfy some people. Like I work from home. If I want like more human interaction, I have to like make myself leave the house, whether it's to go to like the coffee shop or the gym or to meet up with like a friend in town. I could very easily, if I didn't do that, just be home by myself for weeks on end. But I think that would also take a toll on me in a similar way that this has taken a toll on Pearl and Howard, who like their interactions have been with people that they've brought into the house to satisfy Pearl's desires in a variety of ways. That isn't healthy. Not that I appreciate a husband who's like going to make his wife happy, like in whatever way she needs. However, I do think that the isolation aspect has probably played a major role in whatever's going on with both of their mental health.
Isolation 100% has an effect on your mental health. Go, Mark.
One of the things with media and social media is you don't have to present yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those interactions are what you want people to see? And you can make yourself be who or whatever you want by just how you present yourself through Instagram or Facebook or TikTok.
Right.
And like, how many of these people do you end up meeting to find out that that's not who they are at all when you finally get to see them in person? And there's a lot of games, a lot of acting, And then you get other aspects of social media where people are going back 10 and 20 years into some of the stuff that's been around that long. And, oh, well, you said this 15 years ago, and people get fired for it and all kinds of stuff. I don't know. I see more damage done from social media than I do good.
But none of us.
Also, the difference is I'm also probably of the older generation of the three of us. I'm in my 40s. I was an 80s kid. We drank out of garden hoses, and you found everybody by where all the bicycles were in the neighborhood.
We did that in the 90s.
Yeah,
too.
we did that in the 90s too, dude.
It's so funny because I feel like Gen X is always like left out of like a lot of conversations for some reason. We go from like boomer to millennial to Gen Z. And but I feel like we have a lot more in common between millennials and Gen Xers.
Yeah. Also, none of us would be here if it wasn't for social media. Keep that in mind too. Kelly and I met on Twitter, and Mark, you and I met on Facebook group. So like social media does social media does have some wins.
But at the same time, you've met me in person and talked to me. How much different am I than my social media?
Look, let me just say, Mark is totally different in person than he is. He's a lot shorter. He talks with a British accent.
Oh man, he doesn't cook. That was all a lie.
Doesn't cook at all.
Can't cook.
Yeah.
He calls Domino's and then pretends it's his.
Yeah, it's a wild ride. Yeah, no, and you know what? It does make me every once in a while though. I will think about, and I don't like to live in this headspace because I also don't think this is healthy. I'll think about like, what would have happened like if we didn't have social media, like or just like internet in general, the things that we have today. What would happen if we didn't have that? Because then I also think like, well, what would we have instead of that? Like, because with social media and just sort of like online dating and apps and everything, I think that's also sort of eliminated what people call the third space, which is like meeting people outside of work, outside of the home. It used to be bars, would be like kind of the traditional thing, that the watering hole that you would go to. But I think we've sort of lost that space because people have become more comfortable with having instant access at the click of a button. And so that is one thing that I'm like, I personally, I do think social media has a lot of negatives. But I think it's also been very beneficial for me personally and a lot of like the relationships that I've formed. But at the same time, it does make me wonder, like, has that prevented me from other things? Has that prevented me from like achieving other, relationships and milestones maybe? But again, I don't think I'm not a shoulda, woulda, coulda kind of gal. Like, I don't think it's smart to live in that space.
And I'm not saying it's completely horrible or shouldn't be, because I mean, I've made some friends through social media, Zambies for one. And she's in a completely different part of the country, but we talk through various media, and it's all over a love of painting miniatures and being nerdy and gaming and tabletop gaming and stuff.
I love that.
There are some uses for it, but I think they've also found that a lot of people have lost the ability to communicate in person. If everything went down, a lot of people wouldn't know how to pick up a date. So
I don't know if that's all social media's fault, though. I think that's a contributing factor, but I do think that there are a variety of things.
It's a lot of the instant gratification that comes from things like the dating apps. You just swipe until you see somebody you like, hit a button, and then you get a message back, or however they work. And
90% of the time, you don't even meet those people in person.
And then how often do you show up and like
you don't?
Tina turns out to be Tom, and it's you
it's
may not even be meeting the same person you've been talking to.
It's a wild ride.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I met my wife in person, and that was 13 years ago. So
I met my wife in person 13 years ago today. Not today, but just in general.
I was going to say today. Damn.
It's to the day. Yeah, no, I agree. Like some of the, just kind of going off of what both of you guys are saying, like some of my most meaningful relationships, have been in a space where I've been able to, and fortunate to meet people like, both of you, Billy, and then the other space where it's like I'm thankful to also do cons and conventions where like some of my best friends have come from that arena, and like I wouldn't have some of the memories that I have in the last 10 years if
Same.
It wasn't for those.
I wouldn't have been a podcaster, probably wouldn't have been an author. So much of our industry is like rely on getting the word out there. So, I mean, I am very thankful for that.
DIY. But yeah, so I think it's going to do it for us talking about X from Ty West. We're going to be back next week with Harley Olivia talking about Pearl, taking it back to the land of Oz, the farm before it was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But Kelly, where can people find you? Where can we find information about the book? Where can we read it? Let the listeners know.
Yeah, I am so sad to say, Mark, across all the social medias. But I have though tried to kind of like pare down as much as I can, which is why I just have the one website, easy to remember, boobies-n-noobies.com. And you'll find all the stuff about the podcast there, as well as my books. I have links for everything on most of the socials. I am at Boobies Podcast for anything romance novel related. And then I'm at author Kelly Ray, Rey, for anything related to me and my books. And there's a lot of crossover between both of my accounts because I'm the same person. So I feel like a lot of people, when they start their author careers, sort of try to create like a new persona and usually a new name. I went into Boobies and Noobies 100% me. So it was too late to try to be somebody else when I started writing my book. So I'm Kelly-Reynolds everywhere.
you should do a book revolving around dad jokes and relationships.
Oh God, that would be too close to my dad. So I don't think I could. I don't think I could do it.
Come on, you just call the main character, like the main character doesn't have any like actual name. The female just calls him daddy. Boom, writes itself.
I feel like I've read that book. Like I think there's a lot of daddy romance out there already.
Do a bunch of dad jokes. Dad
Like, that's
joke romance novel. That
I
would
think
be
Mark-
cool.
He knows
Mark
how to
needs to write a romance.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah. Okay.
I just my wife and I we just watched Trainwreck last night, and that scene where Schumer and Cena are like doing it, and she's like, talk dirty to me, and he's like doing like all of like the sports like metaphors and everything. Yes. I feel like that's what like a dad joke like romance novel would be.
Yeah, and you know what? I love a good dad in romance novels. Single dad, older dad, like whoever it might be. So I think I am going to do a daddy-esque project in 2025. Don't tell my dad, but that's sort of.
I'll tell my wife. How's that?
That's great. She's one of my best readers.
That's very true. She's very passionate about all of your stuff, so I'm very fortunate, because the way that I don't know if I've ever told this story on the air, but we did this years ago. We did this Twitter podcast, like Christmas card exchange, and so like everyone would like just enter your addresses in there, and then you would just like send out like Christmas cards and stickers. It was a great idea. And that's actually how we got connected. And I remember I had the boobies-n-noobies sticker, which was like just pink with the corset.
Yeah.
And then it had the logo. And my wife was so mad that I had this, and she was like, whose is this? And I was, because it used to be on our merch box when we did events. And I was like, oh, this is Kelly. She lives out in Cali. And she was like, who's Kelly? So it was like always a joke that I'd like, and for like 2 years, I would be like, we would do like, I would do your podcast, or you'd come do mine. And then finally, the first time that she listened to the podcast during one of the live streams, she was like, God dang it, I love this girl. And so it's always been like this like running joke between us ever since. But yeah, she's read, we own all of your books now because of her. She's I think she still sponsors you on like Patreon.
Yeah,
I don't know.
she's. I mean, you both are amazing, but I that made me so happy. I loved getting to meet you both in person too. That was such a highlight. But yeah, no, that it's so funny though, because I've actually gotten that from a few people where they're like, you don't know me, but I am this person's roommate or sister or something. I even had one of my ex-students from when I taught a theater camp 10-15 years ago, all grown up, reach out to me and say that she read my book. So I mean, it's wild, but books like movies bring people together.
So you heard it here first. Now you gotta read the book and listen to the podcast. We'll provide links in the show notes below. Mark, where can people find you online?
I've got my nerdy painting on Instagram at Titanium Juggernaut Painting. Yay.
Just go on there and just like, if you know how Instagram is set up, click on like the first picture and just start scrolling and just like look at the dates in between each of them. And you can just see how often Mark posts.
If you look at the first one, it might be depressing because it's about having to put my dog to sleep the other week.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was horrible. It was one of those, we went to the vet because of an issue to find out there was a massive issue.
Yeah.
And just a couple days later, we had to have him put to sleep. So we haven't fully recovered from that in our house yet.
Yeah.
There's still occasional moments that people tear up in the house. And that's been a couple weeks. So I missed my dog. He was a good dog.
It's also really weird to like record with you and not see your dog, because this is the first time we've recorded, because he would just like pop in and just like Mark's hand would just like go down by his side to scratch, or you'd make noise, and this is the first time in
ever
5 years we've never recorded with your dog.
Oh, well, I'm so sorry to hear that. I've been there. So I think any, especially dog owner, understands that for sure. So,
and what makes it worse is my wife was never a dog person. She'd always had cats, so it was her first dog, and it was really over the last few years that she really got attached.
Right.
And she may be having the hardest time with it out of all of us. So it's people don't. I think people that don't have dogs are really missing out. Cats are fun, but they do their own thing, where a dog is just in the middle of everything and wants to be a part of everything. And it's different. And
yeah, they're your babies. I get it.
He was a big baby. He was kind of a dumbass, but he was a good dumbass.
Facts.
Perfect way to end it.
also met Puppy in person too. So
he can attest that Puppy is a dumbass. Yeah. He was not a bright dog, but he was a fun and good dog.
That's all that matters.
You guys can find me on Letterboxd. I'm on Captain Nostalgia. You guys can also find Biscazing wherever you guys get your podcasts from. Make sure that you guys hit that subscribe button and follow us as we spend the summer with Pearl and Maxine and Ripley and a bunch of weird aliens in between, and Michael Fassbender's very bizarre alien. We don't have to talk about that. That'll come in August. But you guys could also find our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you guys get your podcast from. And you guys can also support us financially, help our nonprofit and our mental health education efforts over at patreon.com/victims and villains. So until next time, remember, the longer that you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.